His hand cracked across my face in front of 50 officers. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. My father stood there, chest puffed with the same arrogance he'd worn for 40 years, completely unaware he'd just struck a 3-star general. The room froze, not from shock at the violence, but from witnessing a retired major assault a superior officer. His smirk lasted exactly 3 seconds before he heard the words that would destroy everything he'd built. But the real devastation was still to come. My name is Rachel Winters. Today I command the United States Cyber Command as a 4-star general. I oversee operations that protect this nation from digital warfare, make decisions that impact millions of lives, and hold clearance levels that most people don't even know exist. But for 40 years, in the eyes of one man, I was nothing more than a disappointment wearing the wrong uniform. The evening of my 40th birthday was meant to be modest. A rented ballroom at the Marriott downtown, some decent wine, colleagues from Fort Meade who understood what classified really meant, and jazz playing softly enough that people could actually talk. I'd planned every detail with military precision. Not for celebration, but for containment, because I knew my father would come and I knew what he'd bring with him. Robert Winters entered that room like he was still wearing his major's oak leaves, though he'd been retired for 15 years. The temperatures seemed to drop when he walked through those doors. Conversations didn't stop, they withered. Shoulders that had been relaxed suddenly straightened. My cyber warfare team, people who faced down Chinese hackers and Russian operatives without flinching, suddenly looked uncomfortable. They'd heard stories. Now they were witnessing the source. He grabbed a whiskey from the bar, his third before even greeting me, and started his performance. The same stories I'd heard since childhood, each time more exaggerated than the last. How he'd saved a platoon in Desert Storm, though records showed he'd been stationed in Germany. How he'd earned his Bronze Star through combat, though it was actually for administrative excellence. The alcohol always made the lies bigger, louder, more desperate. I watched from across the room, maintaining conversations with my deputy commanders while tracking his movements like a hostile target. My mother stood beside him, her smile painted on, her silence practiced from decades of survival. She caught my eye once, just for a moment, and I saw the apology there. The same one she'd been giving me since I was 7 years old. Sorry he's like this. Sorry I can't stop him. Sorry I chose him over protecting you. Then he raised his glass for a toast. The room quieted out of politeness, not respect. His words started smooth, praising family values and military tradition. But alcohol and resentment make terrible partners. Within minutes, he was talking about real soldiers versus desk jockeys, about how some people served with their bodies and others just typed on computers. His eyes found mine across the room and his smile turned sharp. My daughter here, he said, voice carrying over the jazz. 40 years old today. 4 decades on this earth, and what does she have to show for it? No husband. No children, just passwords and paperwork. When I was 40, I was leading men into battle. She leads webinars. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Colonel Harrison, my second in command, took a step forward, but I held up my hand slightly. Not yet. Let him finish hanging himself. He walked toward me, whiskey sloshing slightly in his glass. You know what the problem is with your generation? You think sitting at a desk makes you a warrior. You think cybersecurity, he said the word like it tasted bitter, is the same as real combat. But you've never felt sand in your boots. Never heard bullets sing past your head. You're playing soldier, Rachel. You've always been playing. I set down my own glass carefully. That's enough, Dad. The words were quiet, controlled, but they carried the same authority I used when directing operations against nation-state actors. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking. I was telling. His face changed. The false joviality evaporated, replaced by something raw and ugly. He grabbed my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. Don't you dare speak to me that way. I'm your father. I earned my rank with blood while you earned yours with keyboards and committees. Let go. My voice didn't waver. You think those stars on your shoulder mean something. You think because some bureaucrats promoted you, you can talk down to me. You're still that little girl who cried when she couldn't do push-ups. Still soft. Still weak. Still nothing but a disappointment in a uniform you didn't earn. That's when I saw it clearly. He didn't know. After all these years, all the family dinners where I'd deflected questions about my work, all the times I'd simplified my role to avoid arguments, he genuinely had no idea who I was. To him, I was still just playing dress-up in Daddy's world. I said, let go. He squeezed harder, whiskey breath hot on my face. Or what? You'll file a report, write a strongly worded email? This is the real world, Rachel, not your little computer games. The room had gone completely silent. 50 people, many of them combat veterans themselves, watched their commanding general being grabbed and berated by a drunk retiree. I saw Major Chen's hand move toward her phone, ready to call security. Colonel Harrison had positioned himself for intervention. But I needed this to play out. I needed him to cross the line he was sprinting toward. You're hurting me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Clear enough for witnesses. Good. Maybe pain will finally teach you respect. And then he did it. His free hand came up and struck me across the face. Not a closed fist, but an open palm. The kind of slap fathers gave daughters in his generation when they talked back. The crack of it echoed through the ballroom like thunder. My head turned with the impact. My cheek burned, but I didn't move otherwise. I just stood there, looking at him as his hand fell back to his side as satisfaction flickered across his face. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd put me back in my place. He had no idea he'd just assaulted a general officer in front of 50 witnesses. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the ice shifting in glasses, the distant hum of air conditioning, my mother's sharp intake of breath. But nobody moved. They were waiting for my command. I touched my cheek gently, then looked at Colonel Harrison. I gave the smallest nod. Protocol blacklight was now in effect. Harrison's transformation was immediate. The friendly colleague vanished, replaced by a military officer executing orders. His voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. Major Winters retired. You've just committed assault under Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice against a superior officer. My father's satisfaction crumbled into confusion. What did you just call her? Lieutenant General Rachel Winters, Commanding Officer of Joint Task Force ARES, Deputy Director of United States Cyber Command. Harrison's voice was flat, factual, devastating. You've assaulted a 3-star general of the United States Army. The color drained from my father's face. He looked around the room, searching for support, for someone to tell him this was a joke. But all he found were the stone-faced expressions of military officers who'd just witnessed a crime. That's impossible. She works in IT. She's support staff. A younger officer, Captain Rodriguez, actually laughed. It was short, bitter. Sir, your daughter runs operations that prevent World War III. She's stopped more attacks on this country than you've had hot meals. And you just hit her. The 2 plainclothes officers I'd positioned by the door moved forward. They'd been drinking club soda all night, waiting. Their movements were calm, professional, practiced. My father saw them coming and turned to me, panic replacing arrogance. Rachel, tell them to stop. I'm your father. This is family business. I straightened my uniform, my fingers finding the 3 stars on my shoulder board. No, Major Winters. This is military business. And you're no longer family. They took his arms gently but firmly. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him the moment he understood what he'd done. As they led him toward the door, he kept looking back at me, mouth opening and closing like he was drowning in air. My mother finally moved. She stepped forward, hands reaching out, but stopped halfway between us. Her voice was small, broken. Rachel, I knew. I've known for months. I saw an article about you, about the Iranian cyber attack you stopped. I never told him. I was afraid of what he'd do. I looked at her. This woman who'd watched him diminish me for 40 years, who'd stood silent while he stripped away my confidence piece by piece, who'd known the truth and chosen to hide it rather than defend it. You were afraid of what he'd do? I asked quietly. What about what he's been doing? What about every time he called me worthless while you stood there nodding? What about every birthday he ruined, every achievement he dismissed, every moment you could have said something and chose silence instead? Tears ran down her face, but I felt nothing. That well had run dry years ago. You're right, she whispered. I'm a coward. I chose his approval over your protection. I chose comfortable silence over difficult truth. I failed you as a mother. Yes, I said simply. You did. She flinched like I'd hit her. Maybe that was cruel. Maybe I should have been more understanding, but I'd spent too many years understanding, too many years making excuses for both of them. I was done. Your husband just committed assault against a federal officer, I continued. He'll be arrested, processed, and permanently barred from any military installation. His veteran benefits are under review. His security clearance, what little he had, is revoked. The story will spread through every VFW and American Legion in the state by tomorrow. Everything he built his identity on is gone. She nodded, seeming to age 10 years in 10 seconds. What about us? What about family? Family? I looked around the room at my colleagues. My team. People who'd stood by me through cyber attacks and congressional hearings and threats to national security. This is my family. The people who see me for who I am, not who they wanted me to be. She left quietly after that, following the path my father had been escorted down. The room remained silent for another moment. Then Colonel Harrison cleared his throat. General, should we continue with the evening? I looked at my team, these brilliant, dedicated people who'd just witnessed something deeply personal and painful. They looked back with nothing but respect and concern. Turn the music back on, I said. And somebody get me a real drink. We have a promotion to celebrate. The weeks that followed moved with military efficiency. My father was charged, processed, and given a choice. Accept a permanent restraining order and lose his base privileges, or face a military tribunal that would strip him of his retirement rank and benefits. He chose the former, of course. His pride couldn't survive a public trial. The story spread exactly as I'd predicted. Within days, every military retiree in 3 states knew that Robert Winters had struck his own daughter, a decorated general in a room full of witnesses. His drinking buddies stopped calling. His war stories stopped finding audiences. The VFW hall where he'd held court for years quietly suggested he find somewhere else to spend his evenings. He tried to call once 2 weeks after the incident. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. He didn't apologize. He couldn't. Instead, he asked how I'd hidden it from him for so long. How his own daughter had become something he couldn't see. I deleted it without responding. He'd had 40 years to see me. He'd chosen not to. 3 months later, I stood in the Secretary of Defense's office at the Pentagon. The room smelled like old leather and fresh coffee, and through the window, I could see Arlington Cemetery in the distance. The secretary, a woman who'd started her career as an enlisted Marine, handed me a small box. The President approved your 4th star this morning, she said. You'll be the youngest 4-star in Cyber Command history. I took the box but didn't open it. Not yet. Thank you, Madam Secretary. She studied me for a moment. I heard about what happened at your birthday. I'm sorry you had to go through that. It needed to happen, I said. Some battles you can't fight until the enemy reveals themselves. She nodded slowly. Your father was a fool. He had a strategic genius for a daughter and couldn't see past his own reflection. That night, alone in my office, I finally opened the box. 4 stars gleamed against navy velvet. I thought about calling someone to share the moment, but realized I didn't need to. This wasn't about validation anymore. It was about capability, responsibility, the weight of protecting millions of people who would never know my name. A week later, another package arrived. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting. Inside was a photo I'd never seen before. Me, age 8, sitting at my father's old computer, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. On the back, in my mother's writing, you were already becoming who you are. I'm sorry I didn't protect that. There was a letter too. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just wrote about watching me grow into someone extraordinary while being forced to pretend I was ordinary. About the fear that kept her silent and the regret that would follow her forever. About hoping that someday, maybe not soon, but someday, I might let her witness who I'd become without having to hide it. I kept the photo. It sits in my desk drawer, beneath contingency plans and classified briefings. Not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence of persistence. That 8-year-old girl hunched over an ancient computer, ignoring her father's disapproval in the background. She was already on her way to becoming me. The letter I sent back was brief. Not cruel, just clear. I wrote that I'd become who I am not because of them, but despite them. That forgiveness wasn't mine to give because I'd moved past needing it. That she could follow my career in the public record. The unclassified parts at least, but that my personal life was no longer accessible to people who'd treated it as acceptable collateral damage. 6 months after my promotion, I gave a keynote speech at the Women in Defense Symposium. I didn't plan to talk about my father. The speech was supposed to be about emerging cyber threats and force readiness. But standing there, looking out at 200 young female officers and cadets, I saw myself at 25, 30, 35, still fighting for air in rooms where men sucked up all the oxygen. So I told them about the slap. About the father who couldn't see past his own ego to recognize his daughter's achievements. About the mother who chose comfortable complicity over difficult advocacy. About the moment when external validation stopped mattering because internal knowledge became enough. The room was silent when I finished. Then a young captain in the front row raised her hand. "General Winters, what happened to your father after that night?" I thought about how to answer. The truth was I didn't know the details. I knew he'd moved to a small apartment across town. I knew he'd stopped going to veterans' events. I knew he'd become a cautionary tale in military circles. The major who'd thrown away his legacy for one moment of violent pride. But those were just facts. The real answer was simpler. He became irrelevant, I said. And for someone who built his entire identity on being important, that's the worst fate imaginable. The captain nodded, understanding more than I'd said. Later, walking back to my office, I passed the wall of heroes, portraits of 4-star generals who'd shaped military history. Soon, my portrait would join them. First woman to achieve 4 stars in Cyber Command. Youngest to reach that rank in my branch. The classification levels meant most of my achievements would never be public. But that didn't matter. The work mattered. The protection mattered. The example mattered. My phone buzzed with a priority alert. Russian hackers were probing our infrastructure again. In 20 minutes, I'd be in the Situation Room, briefing the Joint Chiefs on our response. In an hour, I'd be coordinating with the NSA and CIA. By midnight, I'd have neutralized a threat that could have crippled half the eastern seaboard's power grid. This was my reality. Not the medals on my chest or the stars on my shoulders, but the responsibility of holding the line in a war most people didn't even know was being fought. My father had spent his career fighting yesterday's battles. I was fighting tomorrow's. That night, working late in my office while my team dismantled another attack, I thought about evolution. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that happens in server rooms and secure facilities. The kind where a girl who was told she was too soft becomes the hardest line of defense, where silence becomes strategy, where dismissal becomes fuel. I thought about every young woman who'd been told her contributions didn't matter because they couldn't be measured in muscle. Every technician dismissed as support staff while holding up entire operations. Every quiet professional whose achievements were invisible because they happened in classified spaces. This story, my story, was for them. Not as inspiration, but as confirmation. You don't need anyone's permission to be exceptional. You don't need validation from people who can't see past their own limitations. You just need to keep moving forward. One line of code, one operation, one quiet victory at a time. My father thought respect was something you could demand with volume and violence. He never understood that real respect is earned in silence, built through competence, and cemented through protection of others. He thought leadership meant being seen. I learned it meant seeing threats others couldn't imagine and stopping them before anyone knew they existed. The last time I saw him was by accident 6 months ago at a grocery store. He was buying whiskey and frozen dinners. I was grabbing coffee between briefings. We stood there for a moment, 2 strangers who shared DNA and nothing else. He looked older, smaller somehow. The brass and bluster had been replaced by something hollow. He started to speak, then stopped. What was there to say? Sorry I hit you. Sorry I never saw you. Sorry I measured your worth by my limitations. I walked past him without a word. Not from cruelty, but from closure. Some stories don't need epilogues. They just need to end. But my story didn't end there. It evolved. From needing approval to commanding respect. From accepting dismissal to demanding recognition. From playing small to protecting millions. My father gave me his name and his doubts. I kept the name and destroyed the doubts. Now, when young officers ask me about leadership, I tell them about the power of patience. About playing long games while others chase short victories. About building competence so undeniable that titles become afterthoughts. But mostly, I tell them about the moment when external validation stops mattering. Because you finally understand your worth isn't determined by anyone's inability to see it. My office walls don't display family photos. They hold maps of digital battlefields. Commendations written in language so classified most people wouldn't understand them. And one small photo of an 8-year-old girl at a computer, already becoming someone her father would never recognize. That's my legacy. Not inherited but earned. Not granted but taken. Not visible to those who choose blindness, but undeniable to those who see clearly. And if you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever been dismissed by someone who should have been your champion, If you've ever had to build yourself from spite and determination because support wasn't available, know this. Your authority doesn't come from their recognition. It comes from your refusal to need it. The stars on my shoulder weren't given by my father or validated by my mother. They were earned in rooms they'll never enter, through decisions they'll never understand, protecting people they'll never meet. And that's exactly how it should be. Some people spend their lives trying to prove themselves to those who refuse to see them. I spent mine becoming someone they couldn't ignore, then choosing to make them irrelevant anyway. That's not revenge. That's evolution. And it's available to anyone willing to stop asking for permission to be powerful. My name is General Rachel Winters. I've stopped 17 major cyber attacks against the United States. I've prevented 3 potential wars through digital intervention. I've protected critical infrastructure that keeps millions of people safe, warm, and connected. None of that needed my father's approval. It just needed me to stop waiting for it. And that's the real lesson from that slap in the ballroom. Not that violence reveals character, but that sometimes you need someone to show you exactly who they are so you can finally stop hoping they'll become someone else. My father freed me that night, not through his hand across my face, but through his inability to see what he'd just struck. He hit his daughter. He struck a general. Only one of those identities mattered to him, and only one mattered to me. We were finally perfectly, permanently misaligned. And in that misalignment, I found my freedom. The work continues. Tomorrow there will be new threats, new challenges, new moments where I'll stand in rooms full of power and speak with authority earned through excellence, not inheritance. My father's voice, once the loudest in my head, has faded to nothing, replaced by the quiet hum of servers protecting democracy, the rapid keystrokes of my team preventing catastrophe, and the satisfied silence of victories no one will ever know about. That's my story. Not one of triumph over adversity, but transformation through it. Not about becoming someone despite my father's doubts, but about realizing I was already someone before his doubts ever mattered. And if you're reading this while sitting in your own shadow, while shrinking to fit someone else's limitations, while waiting for permission to be powerful, stop. Your authority is already there, waiting. You just have to stop letting unworthy people convince you otherwise. The stars are earned in silence. The real ones always are.